Alright, so here's a little video to help some of you defend King Charles and explain why Charles I can be considered innocent or not guilty and didn't deserve to be punished at the end of the Civil War. It's quite a hard thing to do, really, because obviously we've looked at some of the things that King Charles was criticised for, both before the Civil War and during. But there are quite a few people out there who think that maybe he shouldn't have been punished, and obviously some of you are going to be tasked with, or have been tasked with, trying to defend him against other people who do want to see him punished at the end of the Civil War. So hopefully this video will give you a few little tips about things you might want to consider when you're standing up and defending King Charles in our little mock court at the end of the Civil War. So firstly, I think the first point that is quite important is, even at the time, at the end of the Civil War, not all MPs, members of Parliament, agreed that Charles should have been put up on trial. There were 46 MPs who voted whether or not to put Charles on trial, and only 26 of them said yes. The other 20 of those 46 said no. So it was pretty close, you know, even amongst these 46 MPs, there were nearly half said no, we shouldn't put the king up on trial. So if the MPs, the members of Parliament, who obviously the war has been the King's army versus Parliament's army, if half of the parliamentarians, or nearly half of the parliamentarians, are saying no, we shouldn't put him on trial, that shows that even at the time there was a lot of there were many MPs who thought, we've gone too far here, we shouldn't put the king up on trial, we shouldn't punish him for what's just happened. Now, speaking of that vote, some of you may be wondering, well, why have only 46 MPs voted? That doesn't sound like a lot. Well, you know, there were over 400 MPs active at the time, so why have only 46 voted? Why have only about 10% of them voted? Well, so few of them voted because Oliver Cromwell actually blocked 240 MPs from getting into Parliament to cast their votes. Because to get the trial in the first place, Oliver Cromwell thought, well, I think that actually a lot of MPs are going to vote no. So he blocked, as I say, 240 of these MPs from even getting in and voting. That's not very fair, and it's not very democratic. Obviously, Cromwell and the rest of, or many other members of Parliament have been accusing the king of kind of ignoring the people and ignoring Parliament. Well, Oliver Cromwell's doing that here by blocking MPs from voting. It's not very democratic and not very fair. Another thing that you might want to consider is that in order to put King Charles on trial, they have to put King Charles on trial in court. Well, the court is the Crown Court, the King's Court. So it's a bit strange to have the king on trial in his own court. That's quite strange. And another thing is as well that one of the crimes that King Charles is being accused of is the crime of treason. Now, treason is a crime against the country or against the king. Well, he is the king. So how can he commit a crime against himself? And, you know, the king kind of represents the country, or is the country in many people's eyes. So again, how can the king or the country commit a crime against itself? It's a bit of a daft idea. At least that's what Charles would have said, and many other of Charles's supporters would have said exactly the same thing. You could also argue that for the Civil War to have taken place in the first place, you know, it takes two to tango. A war doesn't just happen because one person wants it. You know, it's not just King Charles goes, right, let's have a war. Parliament had done a lot of things to, you know, to spark this war off in the first place. Can the blame for the war just be laid at Parliament's door? I'm not sure about that. Remember that Charles had actually agreed to a lot of Parliament's demands. He'd actually had several of his advisors executed when Parliament complained about them. You know, King Charles did want to try and keep Parliament on side. You know, if Charles was just itching for a war against Parliament, I don't think he would have done that. I don't think he would have executed his advisors and his friends just because Parliament wanted it. I think he was trying and keep Parliament happy, for want of a better word. He also agreed to many of their other demands as well towards the end of his reign, just before the start of the Civil War. Many of the demands that Parliament presented to him, he did agree to. He said, I will give you a bit more, I'll let you you meet more often, I will get rid of some of my bad advisors. There were certain things that he wouldn't agree to the church as well. He said that he wanted to have a role in the church, but for many of the demands that Parliament presented to him, he did agree to them. Again, that doesn't strike me as someone who is just desperate for a war and desperate to get rid of Parliament permanently. So you could argue that. It also might be considered a bit harsh to punish Charles for marrying a Catholic, as it doesn't make him a Catholic. Just because he's married a Catholic, it doesn't make him a Catholic. My fiance loves country music, but after we're married, I'm not sure that I'll suddenly start loving country music. In fact, I'm pretty sure about that. So just because you marry someone who is a certain religion or likes a certain thing, doesn't mean that you do too. So obviously Parliament were very annoyed and very upset that Charles had married a Catholic, but that doesn't necessarily make him a Catholic himself. So it's a bit harsh to punish him for that. Remember, part of the reason why he'd married Henrietta Maria in the first place was that he wanted an alliance with France. It had nothing to do with her religion. He wanted to get an alliance with France, tie England and France together so they'd defend each other. So it didn't have anything to do with religion, or very little to do with religion anyway. Parliament could also be considered just as bad as Charles in the build-up to the war. Remember that they had actually presented Charles with a huge list of complaints about him, the Grand Remonstrance. This is quite a serious incident because basically they printed them off and handed it out around London, complaining about the king. Now, if you've got a complaint against someone, you take it to them. You don't badmouth them. If I'd like to think that if any of my students had a complaint about me, they'd come to me first before they, wrote down a big list of complaints about me and handed it around the school. I'd certainly hope that they'd come to me first. You don't just make a big list of complaints about the king and start handing it out. It's quite shameful, really, and it's certainly quite humiliating for King Charles. So you can understand why he was a bit upset by it. So, it kind of links back to one of the points I've already made about it. It takes two to tango. It takes two to start a war, really. It's not just, you can't really lay all of the blame at Charles's feet. So there's a few ideas that you guys might want to use if you're defending King Charles against the people who are trying to get him punished, against Parliament. So hopefully it's been quite useful. Remember as well that you can look back through your book and try and come up with some more ideas about how you can defend Charles in our mock court, which we'll be doing in the next few lessons. So as I say, hopefully that's been quite useful for you, and I will see you soon. Thank you.